Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Carlos Hoffman and Professor Thomas Borowinsky for the kind invitation to speak in this symposium, Thought and Frontier. The title of my talk today is Augmentation of the Senses, or the machine becomes an idea that makes art. Let's start by raising a general question. What is the relation between digital art and its medium? We know that art is highly dependent on its medium, as historians and artists have been telling us this for centuries. We also know that advances in technology are changing media all the time, and that this will only accelerate in the future. The relation between digital art and its medium, however, remains unquestioned. In the future, academicians might have conferences called Digital Art in the Age of X, almost every year or even every few weeks, because X will change rapidly. If this is true, how then can we address the relation between digital art and its medium? Medium specificity is self-evident, but it doesn't tell us much about digital art. It only returns us again and again to a nominalism of art. For example, the kinetic artwork and computerized music created in the 1950s and 1960s have largely been lost, as there are no machines left that can play them. Similarly, if you were today given a floppy disk, if you still remember, containing a digital artwork from the 1980s, you would have difficulty finding a drive or a computer device capable of reading it. Because digital art is so dependent on its medium, it is always already dead. Medium specificity is the name of this cemetery. Looking back, we don't see any cadavers of digital art because their deaths are silent. They disappear into a black hole of information. The faster the media develops, the quicker it will head towards death. New media arise and new work appeared in the same way that gadgets updates every season. Is this the destiny of all digital art? In order to examine the relation between digital art and its medium, it may help to first examine the relation between art and its medium in general, especially art since the 20th century. We can generalize that in modern art, we observe a phenomenon. That's to say, art resists against its medium and the limits imposed on the medium. In this process, art augments our senses so that a new reality can be revealed to us. This reality, insofar as it is beyond the limit of the conventional understanding of art, is always spiritual and mystic in nature. A common feature we find in modern painters from Kazimierz Malevich to Vasily Kandinsky. If we follow the historian Clement Greenberg, that modern art started with Edward Manet. It was because Manet resisted against academic realism and painted a flatness which started what is now known as Impressionism, as Michel Foucault told us in the essay Manet and the Object of Painting. And if Paul Cézanne is considered another pioneer of modern art, it is also because Cézanne always searched for a depth of being through his canvas, as Merleau-Ponty told us in the essay Eye and Spirit. This gesture of resistance culminates in Marcel Duchamp's ready-made, his Fountain, which acts both as a scandal and a new possibility for art. Duchamp's work resists the limit of medium and negates the concept of art. Art doesn't disappear in this negation. Instead, art is enlarged through Duchamp's work. That's to say, it is augmented. Therefore, one can understand that Duchamp remains one of the pioneers of modern art and conceptual art. As Joseph Kossuth suggests, in Duchamp, one sees art as idea and no longer art as we see in Ed Reinhardt. Kossuth states in his famous book or essay, Art After Philosophy and After. All art after Duchamp is conceptual in nature because art only exists conceptually. Artists question the nature of art by presenting new propositions as to art's nature. End of quote. Modern art paved the way for conceptual art or post-1963 art. As we know, in 1964, Andy Warhol exhibited his Brillo boxes in Stable Gallery on the East 74th Street in New York City, indicating the end of modern art, according to the art critic and historian Arthur Danto. Conceptual art is probably the most intimate friend to philosophy since Plato, who, as we know, opposes philosophy to art. In conceptual art, we see another form of resistance originate from philosophy, but also attempts to go beyond it and be its successor. Art aligns itself with idea, for idea is that which develops. Idea is not limited to the canvas, and the idea moves in time and space. Idea is always an ecstasis, in the sense of Heidegger. An idea becomes a machine that makes the art, like what Saul Levitt wrote in his famous essay, Paragraphs on Conceptual Art, in the sense that the idea constructs and continues constructing the reality of the observer. The artwork no longer represents an object or an idea, but rather the machine is identified with an idea that constantly actualizes itself. So what is an idea for the conceptual artist? It is not the Platonic idea, meaning that which is in the other world. Even though the conceptual artists were largely inspired by the analytic philosophy of language, especially that of Alfred Jules Ayer, they are probably close to the idealists, especially Hegel, though perhaps unconsciously. This is because they are all concerned with idea, and the idea is not a representation, but rather movement. This movement is necessarily recursive, be that a paradoxical anecdote like one finds in Frank Stella, or tautology as in Kossuth, or dialectics. For Hegel, the concept unfolds itself dialectically in time towards its universality and concreteness. And the life of the concept is called idea. Hegel becomes furious when his contemporary, Wilhelm Traugott provoked him by asking if the idealist could deduce a pen from thinking. Cook sees an opposition between idea form and matter, while Hegel insists that the concept, the belief, is concrete and real. Conceptual art could have been material proof of this. One may compare the abstract painting by Malevich, Black Square, 1915, with the black paintings of Frank Stella. The Black Square of Malevich resists the medium as representation of an objective reality. On this, Malevich once said, I quote, "Up until now, there were no attempts at painting as such without an attribute of real life. Painting was the aesthetic side of a thing, but never was original and an end in itself," end of quote. By resisting canvas as a medium which depicts a thing, Malevich makes the painting itself a thing. He reinvented a new language of form, one that is more intimate to poetry and feeling than to rational thinking and objective reality. In the non-objective world, he states, and we quote here from Malevich, Suprematism has opened up new possibilities to creative art, since by virtue of the abandonment of so-called practical considerations, a plastic feeling rendered on canvas can be carried over into space. The artist, the painter, is no longer bound to the canvas, the picture plane, and can transfer his compositions from canvas to space. In Stella's painting, we see the reminiscence of Malevich's black square, but Stella sets the image into movement. The idea becomes a machine that constantly produces a reality through the intuition of the spectators. The black square is set into movements recursively, and it is in this sense that we can associate with a machine or an algorithm today. This is significant for our understanding of digital art, and I think is somewhat underestimated because the statement that the idea becomes a machine that makes the art means precisely a repetitive process of production. Otherwise, why is it necessary to compare the idea with a machine? In the suprematism of Malevich, we see the striving of feeling against objective reality assigned to the canvas, and the limit of time and space by the canvas as medium. In Stella, we see this priority of feeling replaced by the idea which, like a machine, constantly produces a reality which is beyond the canvas. Retrospectively, we know that Stella has been regarded as a precursor to system art, an art form inspired by cybernetics and coined by the art critic Lawrence Alloway in 1966. It is also via Stella's work that we can move now on to the question of digital art. The difference between digital art and painting or other kinds of analog art is that the medium of digital art is digital in nature. It varies according to different protocols and levels of abstractions, but the fundamental of the medium is digital. What do we mean by digital? We often think of it as zeros and ones. However, this binary representation is only one level of abstraction, or which I prefer to call an order of magnitude. Now, give an example of a glass of water consists of millions of particles. But when we drink water, we are not feeling the bouncing around of these particles in our mouth. Instead, we are sensing a cool and tasteless liquid running into our throat, where you probably have more feelings when you are very thirsty. The microphysical and the phenomenological situate in different orders of magnitude. Therefore, if we simply say that digital means 0 and 1, then we commit a theoretical mistake. Looking from two different orders of magnitude, one can claim that we live in a digital universe because everything is digital. We can find examples of these in theories such as Edward Fredkin and Friedrich Schiller. Or one can claim that digital does not exist. Instead, what we experience are things like some post-Heideggerian philosophers such as Graham Harman might claim. However, one commits an ontological mistake if one dimension is taken as totality or entirety. As we have established, the medium of digital art has changed dramatically since the first appearance of computers gave rise to computerized art, music, and then the emergence of computer network, which gave us net art in the 1990s. But what lies in the genetic process of digital technologies? Maybe we can claim that in this process, there is a general tendency towards a materialization, meaning that which is not considered to be immaterial can now be captured, materialized, and manipulated by a computational device. So I repeat, meaning that which is considered to be immaterial can now be captured, materialized, and manipulated by computational devices. This general process of materialization creates new temporal and spatial dimensions for the creation of art. In terms of temporal dimension, we know the phonograph and cinematograph at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century introduced time-based media that stood in great contrast to painting and photography. These media allowed exact repetition, which also produces an experience that is no longer conditioned by a unique time and space. This repetition of time is still in itself linear. That's to say, as a recording device, both phonograph and cinematograph introduce a repeatable linear time. Digital technology fragments this linear temporality by turning every sound image into grams. For example, we know that with digital technology, it is possible to divide a second of sound into a bunch of micro sound, each of 1 millisecond, like what musicians Curtis Rose and Yanis Xenakis have demonstrated in the granular synthesis, which opens up a new relation to the indivisible human experience. For example, I will not be able to perceive the millisecond as an individual sound, but only as the whole that is already synthesized, as Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz says, when we hear the roar of the ocean, we don't really perceive the perception of the wave, but only a synthesis. But now we are able to devise them. We are able to scrutinize the perception. In and between these two orders of magnitude, that's to say, in and between the micro and phenomenological, some interobjective relations can be established through digital technology, which could be visually displayed. I called interobjective relations those which are independent of the association of human mind, but rather it is a constant materialization of relation that's discovered according to new epistemologies and technologies. An algorithm is not a recipe, because a recipe is a linear instruction. Cut the carrot, season them, and then put them in the oven. An algorithm can be linear, but what makes it powerful is non-linearity, or more precisely, recursivity. And this is the recursivity is the subject of my of a book that I published in 2019, and it just came out in Spanish in October. This recursivity can be identified in the Turing machine and in Gödel's general recursive function, which are the theoretical foundation of computation today. The algorithm takes over from the idea in conceptual art, and this is precisely what makes it necessary to reflect on the relation between digital art and conceptual art, between digital art and its own medium. Digital art no longer takes up the task of Malevich or Stella, rather it is capable of producing a reality materially constructed by data, and which can even be transformed into a physical experience through 3D printing. So today, maybe Hegel could proudly respond to Kurt's criticism by 3D printing him a pen. Marshall McLuhan once said that the medium is the message, and it is. We have always ignored the medium and focused on the message without realizing that the medium is probably more significant. This focus on the medium opened a new discipline in the 20th century, namely media studies and the philosophy of media. The conceptualization of media as the extension of central nervous system, or technology in general as the extension of the body, was a task for the 20th century. It doesn't take us far enough in this century of ours, and it does not yet touch the question of art. So let's ask one more question. How would digital art resist its medium? What do we mean by resistance? So here we come to the last part of my talk. Don François Lyotard, after the legendary exhibition Les Matériaux in 1985, which we can call a postmodern exhibition, suggests to the artist Philippe Perrenot, the French artist Philippe Perrenot, that he was thinking of organizing a sequel to Les Matériaux titled Les Résistances, the Resistance. It was not realized due to Lyotard's death in 1998. However, I believe that the resistance Lyotard was calling for is against what he saw as the limit of digital media. Lyotard sees the hegemony of digital technology as turning the individual into database entries and governments into technocracy, which for Lyotard is best demonstrated by Niklas Luhmann's systems theory. Today, the medium is becoming even more hegemonic, and that is something we don't find with the canvas, because a canvas has never become hegemonic beyond painting. Today, the medium on which digital art finds existence does not belong to the art academics, museums, or galleries, but rather to the industry. Digital information channel is where different domains that were unrelated before now converge. Because of this, today, we cannot easily distinguish artistic activities from financial speculations and entertainment, especially those embodied immersion experience that creates spectacular spots of tourism. If digital art deserves the name art and not simply craftsmanship or entertainment, as we said before, it is because in comparison with a craft, the work of art is always at work, which Aristotle calls energeia. But what is at work in the work of art? It is that which opens up what is closed. What is closed is always closed by the medium, because the medium itself and the conventional use of the medium impose limit to that work itself. The work of art does not exist without a medium. However, to resist the medium is not to abolish it. Malevich didn't destroy the canvas, and the surrealists didn't destroy cinema. Instead, they opened up new approaches to painting and to cinema. To resist means, first of all, to enlarge the medium of art, and with this enlargement opens us to a new reality. We may recall what Paul Klee says in his notebooks: art is what makes the invisible visible. Visual art indeed makes what is invisible visible, since the invisible does not belong to the realm of vision, but the task of art for Klee resides precisely on the resting of the invisible. The invisible is not represented as such because the invisible is brought about by the visible that the painter is able to paint on the canvas. I tend to rephrase Paul Klee's statements on the task of art as art is that what makes the invisible visible, and this is the main thesis of my latest book, Art and Cosmotechnics, because sensible is not limited to vision. So that's why I emphasize on, I rephrase as art is what makes the invisible sensible. The sensible is also present in other realms such as hearing, touch, smell, and taste. The five senses that Aristotle has already laid down for us in the Anima. One may argue that there are more sense organs than Aristotle knew, but that's not the point, because the augmentation of senses that we find in the work of art is not the extension of our sense organs that we can see 1 kilometer further or hear sounds 2 kilometers away from us, for example. On the contrary, the augmentation of sense is an augmentation that opens us to a higher level of reality, towards the open. We moderns are no longer used to see the open, as animals do. Like the poet Rainer Maria Rilke says at the beginning of the 8th elegy of the Duino elegies, I quote, "All other creatures look into the open with their whole eyes, but our eyes turned inward and are set all around it like snails, trapping its way out to freedom. The attempt to open is precisely a form of resistance, a resistance against its medium and the limit imposed on it. Such resistance is not a negation, but an opening of new paths towards truth. Today, through the use of augmented reality and virtual reality in art, can our senses be augmented? Nietzsche finds this possibility in Greek tragedy, where intoxication, house, for him is such a means. Augmentation of the sense allows us to return scientific rationality to a higher room. Here we may want to recall Nietzsche's remark in the 1872 edition of his The Birth of Tragedy. Nowhere I do not wish to suppress entirely how unpleasant it now seems to me, how alien it stands before me now, after 16 years. Well, this is the preface he wrote 16 years after the publication of the book. Before an eye which has grown older 100 times more fastidious, but by no means colder, an eye which would not be any the less prepared to undertake the very task that Audacious book ventured for the first time, to see science under the optics of the artist, but art under the optics of life. Nietzsche returns science to a broader reality called art, or artistic creation, and furthermore returns art to another broader reality called life. Life here does not mean biology, but rather the vitality that allows art to overcome its medium, namely creativity. To resist scientific rationality means transforming it instead of merely serving it. It means making science become a stranger to itself in such a way that it will have to return to itself in order to acquire a new finality. We can conclude that art in relation to its medium consists in resistance against the limits imposed on the medium and the instrumentality of the medium itself. However, this resistance can only take place through its instrumentality. What is in question is not medium specificity, but rather the opposite. In other words, the materialization of spirits that we try to understand above is not contingency, it's not contingent. On the contrary, it is necessary. Art makes such a necessity contingent before turning it into necessity again. The negation of negation does not produce the same materialization of spirits, but rather a spiritualization of matter. I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.